Hi, this is Marty with FLIR Security's TCX Training Department. We're here today to do a video on the new DNA application, DNA being our Discovery Network Assistant. And you can see here in my class folder, I'm on one of my class machines where I do certification classes for Latitude. But you can see we have two different varieties, basically, of DNA. And the old DNA is what I want to show you first, right? This is the one that people have been using for quite some time, and you can see I've got a couple of FLIR cameras here. Now, one thing to point out, you'll see if I come down here to Admin Center, I've got 4 cameras. One is offline, but the one that's offline is an actual Axis camera. So even if this camera was online, you would not see it in our DNA application. Why? Because DNA is our camera finding apparatus, basically. Every camera manufacturer has something similar to this. It's obviously looking by our MAC address, right? Which the first 3 sections of the MAC address is called the OUI, and this is manufacturer specific. So we're simply looking for our own cameras. Now, what I wanted to point out here was, in this older version of DNA, one of the things you'll see if you take a look at the release notes for the new version that was just released, there is new updated username and password authentication schemes in place in the new one. So you'll see right here, this one's online and authenticated. This one is online and not authenticated, right? This is our big 4K camera, right? The 4K box camera. That's what UHD is, right? 4K. And in the older version of DNA, you can see we did have an issue with the authentication, username and password. That's been fixed, and you'll see when I launch the brand new one, the 2.2 version that we're about to see, the reason for this video, you're going to see that is automatically authenticated right there. So we fixed that one thing. Well, it's not even a fix, right? This camera came out after the old DNA, so of course the newest DNA then will incorporate any of the camera integrations that we've got integrated into the system. Now this last one right down here is one of our aerial corner cameras, and this one's not authenticated here simply because I have my own username and password. I've just used Marty as the username and password. So in DNA is looking for the default usernames and passwords. So if you don't have that, what you would have to do then is, right click and go to the login credentials and update those. But what I want to show you is, we have an old video that shows the older version of DNA, so there's no sense really going through all of the functionality that's listed here, but you can see visually there is a decent change, and we've added a few things to the various menus, in particular the right-click menu. Now, the right-click menu, of course, showcases all of the individual things that we've got up here across the top. There is no right way to get to the things that you liked. If you're a right-click person like me, you right-click the camera and you can use the same menu here. If you're not a right-click person, you can use the same features up on top. All right, so we're going to show also that even though most of these functions have been carried forward, right, there are some that we've moved around a little bit. We, got a little feedback from some of our partners, and they said, well, I like this, but how about if we had this? How about if we had that? Or how about if we changed this a little bit? And that's what we did. So I just wanted to show you the old version that's right here, the 2.1.2.19. Again, the most recent one, except of course for the brand new one that we just rolled out, and that is the 2.2.0.0035. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one. And if you can see my desktop, which you can't, right, because I'm using a version of this GoToWebinar software that only showcases the highlighted application that's up there. But if I just go here, I've got a shortcut on my desktop that takes me to the DNA application. So let's go ahead and full screen this so we can get a big screen here. And we can take a look now. Now, one thing that has changed, and as I mentioned, that was the 4K camera, has now been authenticated, right? Because that's been updated into the brand new one. But visually, you may have seen a little bit of a difference in these pictures that were up here in the previous version compared to what they are now. Now, not only is there some visual updating that we can see here, there's also some updating that's been done to the right-click menu as well. And if you can remember, and you're good at whatever that game is that they used to play back in the day, concentration, right? And you can remember what these buttons used to look like. There's one missing. There's a reorganization of a couple of things. So we just wanted to sort of walk through these and show you. But you can notice one thing in particular, export, right? This has been added now, not only on the right-click menu, but also right up here at the top. And then you're able to choose. This has been a request I've heard a number of times in the certification classes that I do. And I always thought it was a good idea, right? Because once you have all of your cameras in here, then you simply export the report. You now have a list of all of those cameras, including the model name, the login status, the IP address, all of the information that you can see listed here. So that was a great addition, I think, to the system. All right, so what I wanted to do first was to show you that, as I pointed out before, that DNA application itself uses the default login credentials. So if you've changed those in your cameras and then try to find them in DNA, well, then you kind of got a problem, right? So generally what you want to do is use DNA to bring the system up. And then you can highlight a series of cameras, like so. And then from the right-click menu, you've got a couple of choices, right? Not every choice, right? Because you can't use the web or the device properties because you have multiple devices listed. But what you can do is update credentials, right? So my recommendation is first find your FLIR cameras using DNA and then update them all to your, whatever the username and password is you're using for that site or for your location as our VAR partner. This is the much easier way to do it. So anyway, we want to show a couple of things here. First, the IP setup, or actually is the first thing in the lineup here, but right now this camera is not authenticated yet, and I told you why, because I had my own username and password set up. So let's go ahead and go to the login, and what I'm going to do is just change it to what I mentioned I had changed the camera's interface to, Marty and Marty, and I log in and you can see, boom, now I have been updated. So I do have to know this, right? Because one thing when you go to add cameras, right, you go to DNA first to find your cameras, and then possibly, as we just showed before, highlight all your cameras and update them to your username and password scheme. But then you must tell the Latitude system what those usernames and passwords are as you go to discover your cameras into Latitude. So that's another video that we'll talk about, but I just wanted to point that out. So now I've got all my cameras online and authenticated. Now let's just talk about some of the features that we do have in line here. And again, a lot of the features are the same from the previous video, but there are some new additions, so we do need to take a look. If you go to the IP setup, or with this camera highlighted, right click and go to IP setup, it's the same thing. If we were to go there, you can see here, use DHCP has always been up here by default, and if you unclick that checkbox right now, it always used to say in the older version right here, first IP address. Now you'll notice I only highlighted one camera. With one camera, you no longer have that because it doesn't make sense, right? You're just trying to change the IP of one camera, and then you're able to do so here, and then update it and go forward. If I were to highlight more than one camera, like so, and then go to the IP setup, then you can see it still uses that same scheme that we used before with the first IP address, and then it will sequentially assign IP addresses if that's what you want to do for the cameras that you have highlighted here. So let's close that. Now you can see I do have the login button here next. These are already logged into, so if I were to try to do so, it would simply tell me they've already been logged into as well. But if I click the menu itself, you can see the couple of choices I have. If I were to do this, I could just show you. Select devices are already authenticated, just as I described. Now the next one is firmware, right? Firmware is something that we do need to add to cameras to update them on a semi-regular basis whenever it comes out. There's always fixes and new features that have been added via firmware. The problem with this firmware button right here is these two cameras are not the same camera, right? Not at all. They're completely different models. The firmware you can see right here is completely different. So individually, I can go to firmware and then try to update that camera. Now notice this is an analytics camera that I've clicked on, so I'm giving two different fields right here, one for the firmware for the camera, one for the analytics firmware. If I were to close this down and just go to the non-analytics camera and go to firmware, you'll see that I just need to upload the new firmware here. It's quite easy to do. If you have multiple versions of the same exact model of camera, you can simply highlight them all here, go to the firmware location, and then apply it to multiple cameras at the same time. I've talked to some of my field engineers, and even though it allows you to do, if you have 200, it'll allow you to highlight them all and do it. They said best practice is 10 cameras at a time or less. Still a big, big time saver by being able to highlight multiple cameras here in DNA and update that firmware. Next, of course, is the admin button. So if we go right here to the admin button with one camera highlighted, I can factory default the camera. I could partially factory default, right? This gives me the opportunity to default everything except for the network stuff that I've already put into that camera. And then sometimes cameras, for whatever reason, just need a little kick in the butt. And this will reboot that camera, basically power cycling and hoping to overcome some small snafu that might have occurred. We can also do this within other applications as well, but this is a nice one to have right here as an added feature. Now, if I go to the, again, I'll just keep my 4K camera highlighted here and go to the next one, this Properties button. Same exact field that I would be able to find if I right-clicked and went down to Device Properties. Same field. You could update different things in here just like we could before. No change to this field. Now, the big change, of course, is the export field right here. Now, I've done a few tests to determine you don't even need to highlight all of your cameras, right, like this, and then export stuff. You simply can have a list of cameras here, and you go to the export button. After you've added all the cameras, you've updated the usernames and passwords, etc. You've got all the IP addresses that you need. You simply can come right here and export to either CSV or an HTML report. So I'll just do the HTML report, make it nice and easy. I'll throw it down to my desktop, and we'll call it 1. I guess I called the last one 1. Let's call it 17. There you go. I don't have any file name 17 on my desktop, and we'll save it to that desktop. Now, I guess it's going to open it up for us right away, and there you go. You can see here's the DNA version. Here's the camera list, when I exported it and what time, and you can see all of the information is listed here, which you can then compile into various reports, etc.